I am so delighted to have on the podcast today, back on the podcast today, Tobin Slaven, the co-founder of Acton Academy, Fort Lauderdale, longtime entrepreneur and educator. Tobin was in the podcast back in the fall of 2022. And I brought him back to kind of kick off one of our early 2024 podcast episodes because I think it's important to dive into this topic of technology and new technologies, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, the role of technology in education and in classrooms. I am a perennial tech optimist, and I wanted to bring someone on the show who is also a tech optimist who believes that the benefits of new technologies outweigh any drawbacks. So, Tobin Slaven, I am so glad to have you back on the Liberated podcast.
Yes, well, I am as well. It's always fun to connect with you. You've been here at our school a couple times, and then we did the earlier podcast. But today's going to be fun because I'm super excited to hear what you are hearing. That's one of the best things that you do, Carrie, is you get it out and about and talk with a lot of folks. So the questions, the perspectives that you have to share, I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, well, I am looking forward to it as well, Tobin. And I'll have to say that I haven't really dug a lot in previous podcast episodes with founders about technology in the classroom or new technologies, especially AI. So maybe that will be a theme for 2024 to see how various education entrepreneurs are dealing with these new technologies in the classroom. So let's start with sort of your perspective, maybe the 30,000 foot view of what are you seeing in education as it relates to new technologies and AI in particular. I know that you're also experimenting with different products and possibilities around AI in your Acton Academy and in the larger kind of micro school space. So I'd love to just hear, because of your perspectives over the past couple of years. I mean, really, ChatGPT only came out a little over a year ago. So this is all new for all of us. But what are your kind of big thoughts or takeaways from what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is that technology in general is such a broad term because there are so many conversations to have within that one umbrella. So, screen time is a big conversation with parents and with schools. Um, Learning platforms, there are these amazing learning platforms, and there have been for a while. I mean, I think Khan Academy changed the game for a lot of schools. It's a platform that we love and use in our school. So there are many different ways that we could go with this conversation. I think the one that we're most focused on is specifically AI, artificial intelligence, uh, machine learning, and ChatGPT has the attention of a lot of folks out there. So over 100 million people use ChatGPT every week, and they are the fastest growing tech product of all time. Like of all the big Facebooks and Instagrams and TikToks and everyone that we've heard of, no one has ever launched and gathered a big, host of users faster than ChatGPT has done. And it was about a year ago. It was in November that they sort of hit the scene with their ChatGPT product. And then even more impressive is what they've done since then. They've had several big releases that you expect to see this from tech companies every couple of years, and they've had like three major releases just in this year. So there's a lot going on in this space. It's something we're really interested in. Last spring, we started experimenting and testing AI prototypes in our school here at Acton. And this fall, we've actually been, I guess you would call it, incubating a startup within our school, which is also a startup. And that's a little bit dangerous because it's, we don't have big resources ourselves. We're just, but we're interested in it, and we see potential in, I think, particularly in an Acton, because we're so focused on self-directed or learner-driven behavior, tools that we can put in the hands of the learners that allow them to function independently and not have to call on an adult to step in and rescue them or bother their friends who are also trying to focus on their work. Anything that allows them to be more functional and independent that's very interesting to us, and that's what I see in this world of personalized education that's coming with AI.
I agree. So let's talk a little bit more about AI and some of the concerns around AI in the classroom. There is a lot of pearl clutching, I think, last year around, what would this mean now that we have Chat GPT in available to students and potentially infiltrating classrooms and classroom work products. I think ChatGPT is amazing, and I think the more recent iterations of ChatGPT are even more impressive than its earlier release, which was just groundbreaking. I've seen how it's influential in my life and my work, and how it's also useful in my children's learning and their lives. But some of the sort of mainstream critique of AI in the classroom would be concerns around children cheating, kind of using ChatGPT to write essays and taking away, child's, critical thinking skills, having them have to research a topic. They could simply type in the question presented from the teacher on the essay that they're supposed to write, and within a few seconds, they have this perfect 5-paragraph essay. So that seems to be a big one. What do you think are some of the major criticisms, and maybe how can we start to debunk those or address them?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that they all need to be debunked, because some of them are very legitimate concerns. And as we've been experimenting even within our own school, we've had multiple conversations and get-togethers with our parents. They're very on board with what we're doing, and part of that is because we've been very proactive to have these conversations about what are we planning to do, how will it be used. The parents had a chance to get their hands on some of the tools that we're testing so they could experience it firsthand. um, I think that you raised the question of cheating, which is usually the first thing that comes up with Chat GPT, because it is such a powerful, particularly around I mean, we've seen the word models, the ability to write essays and do research and create these really, everything from writing poems to songs to it's amazing in its ability to work with words. But what we're starting to see is the multimodal functionality come on. So that's the ability to generate images or to submit images. For example, a parent might take a snapshot, a screenshot of this. We always hear this, parents work hard all week long, and then they get home and they're fighting with their children at 7 o'clock at night on a math problem that's asking them some approach to math that they didn't learn in school, and they've got to figure it out because their children don't understand it. And it creates a lot of tension in a family. And now there are folks, literally parents, that will snapshot the math problem, submit it into one of these models just to get back, what are we trying to do here? What is this new math, or whatever the thing is that didn't look like anything that they did in school. So um, there's going to be a lot more value than what people even give it credit for. This is going to fundamentally change education. And it's not so much that I don't think of it in the realm of cheating. If schools continue to do business as usual, that's going to be a problem, because if we ask for essays from children and we expect that, other than going back to pencil and paper and sitting there and watching them write it out, if that is the style of education, and I would challenge whether that's even the most effective way for us to be thinking about different learning, different mechanisms and ways of measuring learning. What really smart educators are doing is changing what they're doing in their classrooms with AI. So they let AI, Chat GPT, for example, which is just one model, one company and product that's out there, let the learners use Chat GPT to write that essay. But then the actual work that's being done, the learning piece is now, how do you take that essay apart, and how would you grade it, and how would you start to look at this with a critical eye of what was done well, what could be done better. And so I just think that oftentimes AI gets compared to calculators. That you probably remember in the 70s, there was this big fight about should calculators even be in schools. And the minute, students start using calculators, they're not going to be able to do math anymore. And I think we've seen that, we do math differently. We think about math questions, numerical questions differently now. And we're a little bit less focused on the rote, multiplication. And we have to have that background just generally. But I think AI is more like a laptop or our phones. It is very soon going to become uh, it's not a device per se because you can use these models on different devices, but it's going to be a partner in your life for each of us, children, adults. We're going to use it collaboratively for everything that we're doing, and we're going to start to. And I think that's what's most exciting to me about this space is really that collaborative partnership of working with AI that allows it takes the drudge work out of what we're doing, and allows us to do higher order thinking, not lower order thinking.
Such good points. There's several things that you mentioned that I just wanted to unpack a little bit. The first about, kind of going back to blue books, right? And I actually heard commentators responding to ChatGPT and AI in the classroom saying, yeah, we have to go back to handwriting and pen and paper in classrooms just to make sure that children aren't cheating, and sort of this regressive response to new technologies. And I've written about this, several times over the past year. But one of my main points was let's talk about why kids would be cheating in the first place. And often the sort of motivation to cheat is that you find the work meaningless and irrelevant to your life and inconsequential. And so it's really just about checking a box, not necessarily learning, which unfortunately is so much of what conventional education is today. So cheating is just a byproduct of that, and ChatGPT, is sort of reflecting what's wrong with conventional education more broadly. So I agree with you that I actually think it can be used as more of a tool to encourage learning and engage learners more and create more relevance to what they're learning in their larger lives. So I'm really excited about that. The other piece you mentioned
I just want to
was,
add one
oh
more.
yeah, please.
Sorry to cut you off, Carrie, but yes, there's this big discussion around cheating and our students using these tools to create work that is essentially not their own. They push the easy button and it spit out something that they handed in, and so are they benefiting from the potential learning? There's also the scenario where a child does the work and hands it in and gets accused of using. And I think that's maybe even more troubling to me. And I say this from the perspective of someone who's using AI every day myself in my own work. So, usually brainstorming activities and creating lists. And, we had an exhibition yesterday. So I created a list of questions for our parents who would be coming to help them think about the questions they were going to ask their own children about we did colonial acting and what that experience. And so AI is very good at sort of labeling data and helping you organize data. And it may not be the final version that I do with things, but it has a piece or a step somewhere in my process because it's just so effective and it's fun. It's really enjoyable. It's like having another person sit down with you and do these activities so that it becomes fun and collaborative. And I think students are going to be doing more of this. And the AI detectors don't work. So if folks think they're detecting, it's there's so much going on behind the scenes in this interplay back and forth. It's impossible to detect it. And I'll give you one more statistics that ties into this. So this fall, there was a study that was done. They talked to teenagers who have been using ChatGPT from the spring and the beginning of this school year. 2 out of 3 teenagers are reporting that they're not using it to try to cheat in school, but they're actually 2 out of 3 are asking ChatGPT questions about issues they're having at home with their friends. So social emotional learning, advice. It's kind of like that friend or companion that you can talk to that is not judging. It's just listening, and it will, sort of reflect your thoughts back to you, and it doesn't have its own agenda. You know, when you and I sit down, we can have a great conversation, but you have your stuff going on in your life, I have my own, and sometimes it gets muddy. And these companions give it's almost a reflective writing experience with the tools.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And I think you're right to bring up the sort of flaws in AI detection software. I know my older daughter, who's 17, was taking a class where she had to write an essay, and she put her essay through an AI detector before submitting it. And she was so angry that it came out saying that part of it was AI generated or something like that. And she said, "No, it wasn't. This is all me." And of course was able to go to her teacher and have that worked out. But you're right, there's still a lot of kind of flaws in that detection software and frustrations, I'm sure, around children not being believed potentially, even if they are creating original work. um, you mentioned something earlier too in your previous response, Tobin, about the concern around calculators coming into the classroom, and people thought that was going to be sort of the end of young people learning math, and how could we navigate this new technology? There's historically lots of hysteria around new technologies. I have a whole chapter in my unschooled book about technology and its revolutionary power to transform education for the better, particularly around self-directed education. And in that chapter, I quote a journalist who was talking about a new technology that was just appearing and was going to be similarly revolutionary to AI and ChatGPT. And this journalist said, was sort of lamenting this new technology and said, we will become nothing but transparent heaps of jelly to one another. And this was the 1800s, and the new technology was the telephone. So there always seems to be sort of a moral panic around new technologies, especially truly transformative technologies like the telephone or like AI. What is your sense about that? Kind of thinking back to, how humans have navigated new technologies. Like I said before, I always think that there are certainly, drawbacks, but the benefits always outweigh those in the long run. What are your thoughts on that?
I often try to tie it back to the usefulness and the helpfulness. So, and you're right, there's a whole history of different technology that was going to be the end of the world. I mean, from our generation, it was TV. The TV was going to spoil us all, right? And now people are tuning out from the big screens because they have these little screens, and it changes. There's human psychology that is has been pretty consistent, and then we interact with technology in different ways. But ultimately, there are jobs that we want done. And I love that jobs to be done framework. It's how I often think of what we do in the school. It's how I think about the work that I do in the technical space. Um, what is a job that we're trying to accomplish, and what are the different tools that potentially could get that job done in the most convenient and easiest way? So there is a lot of drudge work that we do, adults do in their workday. I think learners would describe some of that. And I have no doubt that a child today probably isn't as good. This may not be true, but maybe a little less focused on multiplication and division tables. You have to learn it somewhere along the way. It's certainly a life skill. If you go out into the marketplace, you don't want people taking advantage of you because you can't do quick math in your head and when you're looking at discounts and things like that. But I think that what's really interesting is that when you focus a little bit less on that aspect and a little bit more on, for example, solving problems, and not just a math problem because we're trying to get a numerical answer, but a relevant math problem. So we see this, an example in our school would be, dividing up jobs or resources, or there's a reward that the tribe has earned, and so how do we divide this up evenly? And so the things that are very relevant in their own life, that's going to make a difference in how they function on a day to day. That, I think, is the opportunity in any technology that's going to facilitate more of that and allow us to sort of function and focus on higher level thought, more critical thinking, more reflection about who we are as a person and how we're growing. the sort of structure that we talk a lot about is the 16 habits of mind. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's sort of thinking about our thinking, or what are we thinking about, not to get the answer, but how do we how do we process the information when we don't know the answer? And that's to me far more interesting sort of focal area. And that's that's what I see this technology doing, is that we're able to shift that focus. And so we sort of label or organize under this structure of the 16 habits of mind.
Yeah, I sort of wonder if some of the panic around new technologies and AI in the classroom is a response to, kind of conventional education systems saying, "Uh-oh, now we're really threatened. Now we really are going to be forced to change or to go extinct, basically." And this is something, you and I have talked about and thought about, pre AI, pre Chat GPT. Something I wrote also about in Unschooled was, kind of thinking about the future of work and kind of our economic and social realities as we increasingly compete and coexist with robots. And this again preceded ChatGPT and similar models. That it's going to become more and more imperative for humans to differentiate ourselves from artificial intelligence, and sort of what makes us essentially human. And it's things like creativity, curiosity, ingenuity, and entrepreneurial spirit. And of course, those are often the human qualities and characteristics that are so often crushed in a conventional classroom that favors, order and compliance and obedience and regurgitation of facts and information over creativity, curiosity, and ingenuity. So, AI might just accelerate change in the educational system. And of course, we're seeing that change beyond the conventional classroom in the microschool movement, parents and learners really demanding something else besides a traditional classroom. And you're certainly in the heart of that in South Florida, which is such a vibrant cluster of innovative educational models. Tell us what's happening there, Tobin, in South Florida, what you're doing with your community around AI and kind of helping other microschool founders and innovative educators think about the future of learning in these incredible ways.
Yeah, I would add, just before I answer your question directly, I had a conversation with a friend. He's a traditional teacher in a high school on the West Coast in the San Diego area. But he does a lot. He brings AI into his classroom. So we often talk about the tools. He's actually built several that we've used and tested in our space. So we're comparing notes and talking. And his concern was the same thing, that if we can use these new tools in really interesting ways, but if all they do are designed to achieve the same objectives that education has been pursuing for the last 200 years, which is really a focus on, we want children who are going to think for themselves, not be trained to take orders, right? And there's a lot that happens in the traditional school system, just from a numbers perspective. It looks like traffic control. It looks like we've got a big group of people and we've got to organize it. We got to keep them quiet, keep the chaos down. And, there are times when that has to happen in society, but it's not necessarily the best way for an individual to learn. And we've seen this, since the pandemic, families are struggling out there. The learning results are way down. Levels of depression, stress, anxiety are through the roof. Parents are wringing their hands. They're not sure how to help their children. The children themselves describe it as they're disengaged, they're disconnected. They just don't care. Basically, they feel apathetic because what's the point of this? And so I think there's an opportunity to not only address some of these gaps that have come to the forefront. They may have likely have been there before, but they've gotten bigger and they're more of an issue than ever before. And the most effective solution that everyone agrees upon is one-to-one tutoring. Like, if you can have that kind of attention and focus on your learning with someone that cares about you and you care about them, that far and away it's the most effective way of closing these gaps. but it's expensive. So that means it's not going to be available to a lot of families, and it doesn't scale. There's no way to build that, and bring it to every child. And so I think that's where a lot of people are looking at AI and saying, this is an opportunity that this is a technology that's now in place where we can create a personalized learning experience for every child. They can have their own personal tutor. And sorry, I know I haven't got back to your question yet. I'm bringing it back around. There are big players in the space. So Khan Academy, we talked about them earlier, and so how their platform has changed and universalized education resources. Anyone can tap into Khan Academy and go all the way through into graduate level learning. They have a great product that they've built into, it's called Conmigo, and it's an AI essentially tutor that's been trained to not provide the answers, it asks questions, and it will guide a learner through that learning journey. And I think that that's a great example of technology it's here now. It's not wishful thinking of what it's going to be in 5 years. It works really well. And they've created some equally great tools for teachers to facilitate in the classroom. So I think here
And
in South Florida,
very actin oriented, Tobin, if I can interrupt you for a minute, right? Not
yes,
giving the answers, but asking the
yeah,
questions and sort of facilitating learning, which is a hallmark of the Acton Academy model.
yes, the Socratic questions are because we want children to wrestle, you know, um, here in Acton, we talk about heroes. So the hero's journey for our learners. Heroes do hard things, and they do hard things because they know that wrestling with hard things is part of what is shaping who they are as a person. So giving someone the answer or giving them an easy way out or something that's too easy and too convenient is not going to ultimately serve them and enhance their learning experience. And I think that you mentioned this wonderful cluster of schools that we have here in South Florida. We have a lot of folks that are already doing education, doing learning in a different way. They've sort of looked at the model and said it's already broken. There's no sense or need to try to fix that model. Let's do something. If we had a blank sheet of paper, what does it look like? And so obviously we're doing that in our way here at Acton, but other schools. And in the beginning of the coming year, end of January, we're actually gathering not just South Florida schools, but some folks around the country. We're getting together to talk about AI in the learning space and what does that look like. And I'm going to share what we've been doing in our school, the product that we've been incubating. We call it a VPAL. But look at other tools like ChatGPT and how, because that's the one that has the biggest number of users, people are most familiar. So how do we leverage something like that? It's got some challenges, for parents in particular. They have no control of what's happening with the ChatGPT account. If you provide that, your child opens one up because they're finding it really helpful and preparing for school. Parents have no controls. They have no idea what's being discussed there. So there are some reasons why some other learning or education focused tools might be useful in this space, and are coming online in really interesting ways.
South Florida, again, leading the pack with innovation and education. I love that you're all excited about seeing the ways that new technologies can enhance learning in your microschool cluster there. And certainly you're trying to build this product that could be useful across the country and around the world. So I'm excited to check back with you about that when that's ready to be revealed and consumed by a larger portion of the population. I'd love to shift gears if we could, Tobin, and talk about technology, other types of technology more broadly. We've been spending time talking about AI. Of course, it's the newest and most potentially disruptive and most revolutionary in what we've seen in a long time. But there's other issues around technology and screens that tend to haunt parents and educators alike. I think about the push toward social media bans for teens, something I've been an outspoken critic of and have written strongly against, mainly because I think prohibition in all of its forms, A, doesn't work, and B, makes people less safe and products less safe. So that's sort of the primary reason I'm opposed to social media bans, even for youth, even for teens. There's concerns about phones in the classroom and taking away technology. And I often think back to Boston, Boston College psychology professor Peter Gray, who is a real advocate for technology and learning and for allowing children to have full access to technology. He wrote a lot about this in his book, Free to Learn, basically saying taking away screen time for children would be like hunter-gatherer parents taking away bows and arrows from their children. It's the most important tool of our culture. And so to deny children access to these important tools of our culture, it doesn't make much sense and is potentially harmful as an act. So I'd love to just get your larger thoughts on technology and kids today.
I love the analogy of the bows and arrows to a hunter-gatherer society, because ultimately I think our job to be done as educators, if we are responsible for a learning space, whether that's a homeschooling parent or, in our case, private school, micro school environment, traditional school environment, we are all, I think the most important thing that we're doing or should be doing is preparing our children for what their life is going to look like after school, after the post-secondary experience is concluded. And hopefully it's a lifelong learning, habit that they've built during that time. But I think, when we lock away the things that we fear the most, I guess maybe this is a terrible analogy, but we've lived through the COVID years, the last couple of years, and part of what has allowed society to come back online and function was exposure to this virus, right? We've all been building our immune systems and our resistance. And if we prevent children from learning how to function with social media, for example, in a productive way, or to recognize things that are going to be potentially harmful and make their own decisions to remove themselves or protect friends or speak up when something is inappropriate. Like there's so many opportunities that come that are real world applicable, not just in school and for children, but skills that they will carry forward into their adult working lives. And so I just think it's a great opportunity to learn responsibility for all of us individually, as opposed to just locking it away. I'm not a big fan of that, as you called it, the prohibition approach to things, because I think it's a little bit unrealistic, and the history is there to prove that we're rebels at heart. Human beings have this need. If we're told we can't do something, it's going to be sought out. People are going to do it stronger and faster than ever before.
Yeah, and if it's banned, especially for teens, or even if it's banned, in families or in schools, kids will find a workaround to that. Just as we found as Americans a workaround to alcohol prohibition a century ago. So and what happens in those workarounds is the product becomes less safe, because then kids don't feel like they can talk to adults or talk to their parents or their teachers about what they might be finding on social media or experiencing online, because they're supposed to not be online in those ways. And I think that that's a really important point. I like your point about sort of preparing young people to use these tools as they move through adulthood. And I think it's especially important to do that when kids, I would argue, are younger, when we have more influence over them as parents, when we can talk about safety online and some of the predatory practices that they might encounter, and do this when we have that kind of closer relationship to them. So when I hear people, including prominent intellectuals, say, we need to ban social media until kids are 16, I think, gosh, if you just hand kids social media when they're 16, they're already on the cusp of adulthood, when you could have had these conversations with them when they were much younger about social media, build up that trust, have them come to you as a parent when they're concerned about what they're finding online, instead of just kind of throwing them to the wolves at 16 and hoping for the best. What do you think?
Yes, and that conversation around these topics, whatever the specific technology is, the conversation and reflection is one of the big opportunities to learn. So the thing that the example that's top of mind for me right now, because we just finished last week, and it's not specifically a technology question, but in our school we were doing colonial acting, so we were looking at King George and his oppression of our studios and the learners. A number of proclamations had been handed down by King George that removed freedoms that they were used to having here. Uh, when our learners actually chose to revolt and write their Declaration of Independence to King George, this was a living history experience. There was a lot of discussion about some of the benefits, including one was during silent core skills, which we always have had to act, and that's always been consistent, throughout our time, through all act-ins. Our group is not always as silent as they could be, but under King George, they had to be because they were paying penalties and taxes. And our learners actually voted to keep the penalties in place during that one period of the day because they saw how much more productive they were. And so I think technology, I'm bringing this up because distraction is often a key part. Are the tools being used productively? Is there conversation and reflection around what they're doing? And I think this ties back to what we talked about with AI and essays being written and, projects being managed with AI and stuff. Are the tools being used to raise our game to a higher level, or are we distracting ourselves? And in which case, we want people to be thinking about what is actually working here, what is productive for me as an individual, and how can I be more focused and get more out of my innate abilities.
So as we begin to wrap up, Tobin, I'd love to hear, what are your predictions, or what do you think about in terms of the possibilities for the future of technology, specifically as it relates to young people and education? Are you optimistic for the future? What are your thoughts?
I am very optimistic, and I think it shows in the work that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. A year ago at this time, I was Peter, I can think of his last name, the Peter Diamandis, who does the X Prize, and he has a process he talks about where, what is your massively transformative purpose? What's the thing that, if you had all the money in the bank and you could go out and change the world, what would you be doing on a day-to-day basis? And I was thinking about our work here, and it was the same time that ChatGPT came online. And I can just see this future, which I'm very optimistic about, where every child, not just in school, but every child is going to be matched up. We think of it as a VPAL because that's how we work on it, but it may be some other product or some other, I don't know what form it's going to take, but every child is going to have this companion, this partner. And yes, it will be a personal tutor as well, but it's also going to be a life coach, and it's going to be a mentor, and it's going to be like a journal that you can talk to, but it talks back and it asks you questions, and it kind of challenges you to think a little bit more deeply about what you're saying, maybe challenges some of the biases that we all carry within us because of the experiences that we've had, or where and how we grew up. So it will have the ability to challenge those assumptions, things that we just take for granted. And I really think that this is going to be the inflection point for this personalized learning that's coming online. Everyone's going to have this. Teachers aren't going away, but their role is going to shift. And there's going to be a lot less focus on grades and grading, and more on this in bringing our communities together. And I think you'd probably agree with me that our world needs a little bit more of that right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just think about the jobs that have yet to be invented that our kids will be doing related to this new transformative technology. And again, talking about how that impacts education today, that if we continue to persist with a conventional education system, this sort of conveyor belt model of education that we've had for more than 150 years, it's going to hold, some students back because it's training them for a world that no longer exists, for jobs that have, again, not yet been created. And that's where I think, again, parents are excited about new learning models like Acton Academy, like the vibrant cluster of microschools in South Florida, like other innovative education models across the country. And teachers themselves are flocking to these models to launch these new schools and programs or to work in them. So I think the future of education is bright, and a lot of that is thanks to technology. So speaking of that, Tobin, on your website, Acton Academy FL for Fort Lauderdale, actonacademyfl.com, you have this lovely artistic trio of computers and obviously, embracing of technology at actonacademyfl.com. How else can and should my listeners and viewers connect with you or learn more about your program and what the future holds in terms of your AI products?
So I appreciate the mention. My social handle on all the social media channels is at Tobin Slaven. So I grabbed that early in the process, and I like to talk to people. So I think whether it's email or social media, having a conversation and being able to connect with folks and you know ask questions and see where it goes, that's important to me. I pay attention to as messages come in, and take a lot of pride in answering everything directly as quickly as I can. I think for folks that are curious, if you want to see examples, for example, of what we're doing, the website that we set up for our VPAL project is vpal.ai, so it's sort of short and memorable. What I think is different about that, I mentioned Conmigo as an example, ChatGPT, those are sort of big dominant players in our space. What I think is different that we're interested in sort of moving closer and closer to with our prototypes is an AI companion that rather than trying to teach a child, we're much more interested in letting the child teach what they've been learning back to the AI. One, because I think, children love that. Our learners in the school absolutely love it when the adults ask them, so that is so cool. How did you do that? Can you show me? And they light up with the opportunity to show what they've been learning. They're proud of it. They build on their own skills. They get better and better at it. They show their friends. So I think that's really interesting. And then from a technology perspective, what does that AI become if a 6-year-old is introduced to their AI, their VPAL on the first day of school, and they spend a dozen years together, learning together, and the child just keeps teaching the AI everything that they have been learning and they know, and it knows how they learn best, it knows how they perform the best. And then they graduate and they get to take this VPAL out into the real world with them. I mean, to me, that sounds like Tony Stark and Jarvis, except, instead of just they met as adults, they have a dozen years together where this model, everyone in AI talks about the models, the large language models. How about having a model that's fine-tuned on one individual? Like you, Carrie, you have your own AI that knows you as well as you know yourself, and maybe even better because it challenges you on some of these assumptions and biases that we all carry. I think it's a very exciting time. You can see I'm optimistic about it. I don't downplay any of the concerns, the privacy concerns, the ethical concerns. There's certainly there are very real issues that have to be addressed. These large language models were trained on the internet, which was created, a lot of websites were programmed by white men like myself. So that means we don't have the diversity of voices and perspectives in those large language models. But people are recognizing that, and they're challenging those assumptions. So I'm very optimistic that we're just going to get better and better.
I am very optimistic too, which is why I wanted you on the podcast today, Tobin. What a great discussion we've had. I'm looking forward to being back in Fort Lauderdale in a couple of weeks, seeing you at the Innovative Educators Network conference,
Yes.
bringing together all of the innovative educators in South Florida. I'll be giving a keynote there about education and entrepreneurship and the future of learning. So it'll be great to see you again in person. But thank you so much, Tobin Slaven, for being on the Liberated podcast again.
Appreciate you, Carrie, and what you do. The one of the best things that you are doing, you've made it your personal mission, but there's all this work that's happening in different parts of the country, and we're focused on what we do day to day. We're in our own little worlds, our own little silo. You cross-cut those silos and bring the stories together, and that is one of the reasons why you're seeing this shift in folks are opening up their minds to alternatives. I really believe it's the sharing and the caring behind it.